All right, so I want to start out by pointing out a pretty uncomfortable reality that we all face when we're running content marketing programs. And that is, despite our best efforts, nobody really cares about our blogs. I promise it's not as insulting as it might sound. Hear me out. Our customers, of course, care that we're solving problems for them. Sometimes we're solving problems via our products, and sometimes via the written word with content. That does matter to people. That's what fosters brand advocacy, builds trust. But what people don't care about are these engines of content that we've created with the intention of engaging our audiences. Because with relatively few exceptions, our customers aren't that interested in being engaged by us. They're not coming to our sites to peruse written content. They're not coming to us to be entertained. And yet, historically, that's how we've thought about our content strategy. That's how we've organized our blogs, homepages, our newsletters, and that's why I think nearly every retail blog falls flat. But I didn't fly all the way to London to tell you not to bother. This is indeed a talk about effective content marketing. But in order to sort of give you the approach that does work, I want to introduce first the flawed perspective. So the key problem, I think, at play here is that content marketers in general, tend to conflate content marketing with blogging or even with media. They're not the same thing. And we do our industries and our businesses and our customers a disservice when we conflate the two. I think this perspective is quite beautifully illustrated at the moment with the current trend of brand journalism that's happening among the buzziest direct-to-consumer brands in the US. So one example is Away, the luggage company. They recently launched an online magazine called Here Magazine. And this is getting a ton of praise from people like Lean Lux, which is the newsletter that Kieran pointed out. From 2 p.m., Web Smith. These are all people who are saying, like, yes, Away is doing a really interesting retention move. Here's another example of one of their posts. Another brand that's getting a lot of accolades for this over-editorialized brand journalism strategy is Outdoor Voices, one of my personal favorite brands. I've spent unreasonable amounts of money with Outdoor Voices. They also launched an editorial outlet relatively recently called The Recreationalist. Again, with high praise. But I think in about a year, both companies are going to shut down these outlets. They're not going to work. Despite all these chatterings, I suppose, among the direct-to-consumer industry about how these are salacious brand plays, they're not going to work. And I'll show you why I think they're going to shut down via a cautionary tale through Casper, the mattress company. This is a somewhat famous, I think, example of brand journalism's failure. Casper really wants to be a sleep brand, not just a mattress maker in the eyes of the world. They recently said they want to be the Nike of sleep, and they'll kind of shove that down your throat till you agree with them. They're not a commodity. Don't call them a commodity. And a few years ago, they launched a now-defunct blog called Van Winkle's. Van Winkle's was a media hub surrounding sleep, and it was a huge part of this brand play to be more than just a mattress maker. At first glance, it looks salacious. It was really high-quality content. They were even honored with a Webby. But about a year after it launched, it shut down. And the person in charge of the project told Digiday later, generally speaking, being an independent brand publication is not going to work. Because at the end of the day, brands are performance marketers. And if you don't deliver results, they will let you go. You don't even have to read between the lines here. It's pretty obvious that the highly editorialized content approach didn't work for Casper. And yet what's funny to me is they didn't actually learn that lesson. Because in 2018, they had Woolly Magazine, which was a physical magazine that you could actually buy from Casper. I would venture to guess that it also came within a Casper order. They partnered with McSweeney's, which is my personal favorite outlet for editorial satire, to deliver a beautifully written collection of long-form content surrounding sleep. They had an online edition as well. It's an online edition. Can't pretend that I didn't choose this screenshot for a London audience on purpose. Anyway, so it was impressive media. But impressive media and high-quality content, effective marketing, those aren't the same things. What Casper was essentially doing with Van Winkle's and with Woolly after it, by the way, they shut Woolly down as well, What they were effectively doing was shouting about themselves through the lens of sleep. In a beautifully written way, sure, but it was nonetheless insular thinking to really indulge their own brand whims instead of being customer-centric at its core. It's probably based on customer personas. It doesn't make it customer-centric. And if it's not customer-centric, it's not going to work. And that too will be the flaw, the fatal flaw of Here Magazine from Away and The Recreationalist from Outdoor Voices. Despite all of the other marketing success from these brands, we should not emulate this strategy. The most impactful marketers don't get caught up in this temptation to build a highly editorialized content engine. They think about content in much different terms. Content really is just another way to solve problems for customers. And when you think about content from that perspective, you're really not writing a blog anymore. You're writing a library of resources. One of our customers at Tortuga described our blog as a treasure trove of resources, and that requires an entirely different approach. So to sort of explain that approach, I'll give you a couple case studies, starting with Tortuga. We're in the travel industry. We make travel gear known for our backpacks. And a few years ago, we redesigned our blog. This is what it looked like when I joined the team in 2015. It wasn't just a fresh coat of paint to feel more modern, though I think you'll agree we really needed one. But this was more of a brand-wide leveling up to apply design thinking, really, to every aspect of our brand. And we started with our physical line of products, our travel backpacks. Then we moved on to redesigning our online store, and then we moved on to the blog. And when we got to the blog, we had a bit of an identity crisis, because we realized over the past few years, we had morphed away from writing a blog really at all. And instead, the only things that were working for us were these library of resource-style posts. And it doesn't mean that these all have to be dry, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to kind of help you get to the same idea and what that means for your brand by another quick case study. This one's B2B, but I promise the takeaways are directly applicable to e-commerce. Before I was brand side at Tortuga, I was a marketing consultant, and one of my clients was an analytics company called RJ Metrics. I worked with their in-house team to sort of build a holistic strategy for customer acquisition, blending the organic and paid approach. And through that process, we realized that our blog wasn't working at all. It wasn't nurturing the mid-funnel. It wasn't even helping with retention, really. It was this beautifully written engine, but it didn't matter to anybody. It wasn't driving paid leads, for sure. The one thing that was working for us back in 2015 was our annual benchmark report. And this makes sense because it addressed the finite set of problems that RJ Metrics customers wanted to come to RJ Metrics for answers. The benchmark report really contextualized the data for, say, a prospect. If they were running an analytics demo and all of a sudden it spat out their average churn rate, they saw, okay, cool, that's my average churn rate. What does that mean? Is that good? Do I need to work on that? What do my competitors' churn rates look like? What does my industry's churn rate look like? And so it really met people where they were and fostered trust in an authentic way. That's what the benchmark report looked like. And so we pivoted all of our resources towards this benchmark report instead, updating it more regularly, making it more in-depth, and starting from that finite set of analytics questions that we wanted to answer. And Janessa Lance, with whom I worked on this project, nicknamed our approach the barbell strategy, because it looks like a barbell at the gym. And so on one side of the barbell is your one big thing. This is the finite set of problems that you're solving for your audience. This is where you start. You don't start with your channels, which I know sounds backwards. It's certainly backwards from how I learned marketing, is to start with channels and then build a tailored strategy for each one. But that's not where authentic resonance comes from. That's a recipe for siloed noise. But when you start with your one big thing, this deep knowledge of what your brand voice is, what the finite set of problems you're solving for your audience is, and then you repackage that into channels, figuring out how to talk about that in your web copy, on Instagram, every place that you're going to touch a customer, that results in something cohesive that is genuinely resonant. And so at Tortuga, our one big thing is carry-on packing. And so on our blog, that translates to what to bring and how to pack it. Because we make a carry-on sized piece of luggage, so it stands to reason that people might Want help figuring out what to put inside that carry-on piece of luggage, the best travel gear, packing tips for how to pack a blazer without it wrinkling, things like that. And that's what's really driven Tortuga, honestly, to profitability. 30% of our revenue comes from content marketing, and that revenue costs us very little to acquire, which is quite different than a lot of e-commerce brands, especially direct-to-consumer brands in the US. Our marketing spend to revenue, even including things like team salaries, is only 10% revenue. That's why we're profitable. And it's mostly due to content. So how do you find your one big thing? How do you find your finite set of problems? That requires design thinking. And so if that's a new phrase for you, it was for me when I joined Tortuga, it's the process outlined here. And it starts with empathy. It starts not with ideating on solutions, throwing 100 things against the wall, seeing what sticks, iterating from there. It doesn't shout, it listens. It questions knowledge and then listens to customers. Only once you've done that, only once you've interviewed and asked questions via surveys, only then are you really ready to define the problem that you're solving in the first place. Once you've done that, then, only then, can you ideate and prototype and test. Marketers don't tend to slow down before we shout, which really relates to what Ivan was saying earlier in the day. We add noise to the world and then we wonder why it's not resonating. Designers, on the other hand, are trained to not even consider a solution, much less get attached to it, until they've confirmed that the problem that solution solves is the right problem to solve. If you don't start with empathy, you can't find true customer centricity, and you can't find resonance either. Now, it's not quite as fun to work on problem-solving content as it is to write these highly editorial pieces, especially, I went to journalism school, and that's broke my heart a little bit when I came to this realization. But we have to remember that we're not in this game to wax poetic. We're in it to grow our businesses and serve our customers, and it's tough to do that when every post we write does this. That's what happens when you skip stages of design thinking, when you don't start with empathy, when you start with ideating on solutions and shouting at the world and hoping to find resonance in the meantime. But when you go through the entire process of design thinking, when you're thoughtful about the problem that you're solving in the first place, the posts you write start to do this. Okay, so other than being related to your one big thing, what does a resource in your library of resources look like? A good framework, I think, for this is Google's own page quality parameters. So these are documented in the sort of page quality guidelines that Google sends out to people who sort of gut check their algorithm. And if you want to read more about this, I recommend looking up Marie Haynes's work to this accord. She has some great resources here, but I'll quickly touch on them. So the acronym is EAT, which is expert, authoritative, and trustworthy. Expert means that your piece of content is written by the person who has the expertise to write it. So at Tortuga, for instance, our packing list for Morocco was written by a woman who did her Peace Corps study abroad, or Peace Corps tour abroad, I guess, in Madagascar, and went to Morocco probably once a month as a part of that. We didn't write it by like a social media intern who was Googling like, all right, what's the temperature in Morocco in September? And then, okay, I guess this is what you should pack because of that. We got an expert to write it. It also has to be authoritative, and this doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. So this relates to your brand authority, and this is narrow in scope. So this relates to the things that your customers think that you have the authority to solve for them. So at Tortuga, we have the authority on reviewing other travel gear. For instance, we wrote a post about the best travel pants. It's one of our highest revenue content pieces of all time, and we don't make travel pants. We also have the authority to write about packing tips, packing lists by destination. What we don't have the authority to write about is things like staying healthy while traveling. Whenever we try to write something about fitness or mental health or nutrition, it doesn't land because we don't have the brand authority therein, even though we know that our customers are very healthy people. They care about fitness on the road, but we don't have the authority to write about it. Trustworthy is a little more straightforward. Don't be a shitty brand with bad reviews. So who's doing it right now that I've dragged a few people through the mud? Warning. When I did an audit, really, of direct-to-consumer companies in the US who are doing content well, noticed a trend, all in taboo spaces. So would have picked more conference-friendly examples if I could, but we're gonna all squirm through this together. You ready? Let's start with bras. So Third Love, their one big thing surrounds correct fitting bras. That's what they address with their products, and that's what they address with their content. So on their navigation, they have this Bra 101 section, which is brilliant. So they have some pretty dry content on one side around, well, if breast shapes are dry. Anyway, so they have some truly informational problem-solving content on one side, but then they get a little, a step away from that, a step towards editorial, but maintaining the problem-solving roots. My favorite of their sections is asking for a friend. And so these are kind of questions that you wouldn't necessarily talk about in public, but you'll definitely talk about with your friends, like that dreaded line of sweat that you get right here. Or how many bras do I really need? And that one made me laugh because my best friend and I actually had this conversation a couple weeks ago. She was packing up her house to move and texted me and said that she had 66 bras and was that normal? I texted her back, told her I owned 5, and we realized we're fundamentally different people. But Third Love says you only need 3, so I feel a little more justified. Another brand that's doing this really well is called Bloom. They make products that are sort of related to puberty hormones in young girls. So they make things like an all-natural acne medication, like face treatment kind of thing, a face mist, organic pads and tampons. And their content hub is named Bloom University, which is a nod to both education and this idea that a young girl eventually is really looking forward to independence. I think that's a brilliant name. And Bloom is taking the sort of same kind of tactic, I guess, as Third Love, answering these hard to answer questions, I guess, that really reassure their customers on a deep level. I would have loved to read Your Period Cycle Explained from my favorite skincare company when I was a 13-year-old girl, curled up in the back of my ballet class, my tutu all askew, wondering why someone was stabbing me from the inside. I was fine, just getting my first period, and it was terrible. I also really like that Bloom is blending the content and commerce models with their conversation cards. So these are cards that a parent can purchase for their, to have a conversation with their kids around things like consent and changing bodies and what healthy relationship and friendships look like. And so it's a little more natural way to sort of approach these conversations, and it's a way that's deeply resonant with the customer. In stark contrast to Woolly Magazine's well-produced content that just doesn't matter. It just doesn't solve a finite set of problems that customers need them to solve. I don't have time to get into a few more in depth, but a few more to look into in your own time if you want to. Roman on the left, men's health brand. A friend of mine actually ran this content program, so I'm particularly proud of this one. Thinks, which is period panties. And the last one, Lola. This one's the most taboo, so maybe look at this one in your own time if you don't want your boss to see you reading about masturbation. Now that I've said masturbation on stage and talked about my period, etc., apologies. And we've got time for questions?
Okay. Thank you, Taylor. That was fabulous. Fabulous. Hilarious was the word. Yeah. No, that was great. So we do have quite a lot of questions actually for you. So
cool.
Yeah. So first of all, how are you amplifying your content to make sure your audience is seeing it?
Sure. So we have pretty sophisticated customer journeys in our content. So we know that people usually come to us first via a destination-based packing list. So let's say, what to pack for Thailand. And so we have some pretty sophisticated retargeting journeys in place, knowing that once they have a what to pack for Thailand post in their arsenal, they probably also are going to want to look into things like waterproof sandals for a trip to Thailand. So we'll then remarket them with a travel gear review that's relevant to the acquisition post, let's say, that they just read. And so we do that via we're testing web triggers right now. We do it via email. We don't do much on paid, partially because I just want to move away from paid. But yeah, those are sort of the general ways we do it. More niche segmentation than blast marketing.
Okay, and another question, would you consider it beneficial, and when is it beneficial to collaborate with other brands to build relevant content? Because clearly you need to have, as you say, authority in your niche, but when does that kind of work with two collaborative brands that are not competitors, put it that way?
Yeah, we have a few, particularly travel clothing brands that we consider brand friends more than anything. So we just ran a sort of like list sharing direct mail prospecting campaign with a company called Woolen Prints. And basically we both put up 20,000 customer names. We didn't share them with each other, but just both sent home to the mailer, and then they get the same piece of mail, and we're testing to see how that works. And we also, we work with another company called Bluffworks. Their products, every single time they release something new, we know that it's going to be awesome. So we send each other product samples to use in shoots. And we'll talk about that like on our Instagram. We'll tag them on our Instagram and do things like, for instance, they are our #1 pick in the best travel pants, not because they are our partner, but because they deserve to be. But we found ways to sort of deepen that relationship. And they, use a quote from one of our headgear reviewers on their website with our logo. And so we just sort of like lift each other up in that way.
Okay. Another one about the frequency, I guess, of posting content. So some of the content you've got there are kind of, I guess that it's evergreen content. It's guides and advice and guidance and so on. But on the other hand, the people do post on a regular cadence. What if you are posting kind of regularly? What kind of cadence would you suggest?
I would go so far as to say cadence matters very little with evergreen content. We even moved away from reverse canonical. People aren't coming to our blog to see what's new. They're coming for problems to be solved. So they're maybe coming to say, like, okay, I need a filtration water bottle because I'm going to Guatemala and I don't want to get food poisoning. Recommend that, by the way. Not food poisoning, filtration water bottles. Anyway, so we surface a search option way more frequently than we do a sort of cadence-based newness approach. So I would almost say that is the wrong question to answer.
Okay, but is it not the case that Google at least looks for constantly refreshing content? So that's something to do with cadence, but was that just to do with kind of, regular updates?
Yeah, so update your skyscraper content instead of trying to put out inane nonsense new.
Okay. All right, and the final question, do you believe that content marketing will still exist for direct-to-consumer businesses in 10 years' time? And if so, what will it look like or evolve to? Where's it going, in other words?
Yeah, I sincerely hope we'll stop throwing money at these brand journalistic approaches and leave it to the journalists. I would like to see more of a separation between true editorial and this brand-hosted editorial, just from a philosophical perspective. But I think content marketing will really be integrated more in the customer journey of problem solving and trust building and the depth of understanding versus the breadth of topics covered, I guess.